Part of me still can't believe I'm having to make this video. The vile lengths NeuroClastic and its board members will go to shirk themselves of any and all responsibility for their actions is shocking. And whilst I'd rather not comment on them again, the truth of the matter is they give me very little choice. Their actions would be horrific enough for an individual, but for a charity to target someone this way, it can scarcely be believed, and I certainly can't risk them doing the same to anyone else by remaining silent. Though before we get into detail about what they did, I just need to give a quick content warning for the following. Suicide, queermisia, racism, applied behavior analysis, and reparative torture. If you like our work, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing this video on social media. I'd also just like to take the time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're fallible. Thus we strive to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence for yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Lastly, do not harass anyone discussed in the video. The evidence is here for the people who want it. That's how we do things. Hi there, my name's Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about the facts that NeuroClastic founder, Terra Vance, exploited their friend's suicide in a horrific attempt to shield NeuroClastic from mounting evidence of queermisia and racism. Though first, we need some background to understand why Vance chose to do what they did, meaning we need to understand Bethany, her history of targeting the LGBT+ community, and how NeuroClastic stepped in to silence her queer autistic critics. Whilst I'll try to cover all vital information, if you find yourself wanting more details at any point, please check the cited reference. Again, that's what the numbers in the top left corner of the screen are for. Bethany was one of many creators suggested to me whilst I was writing an expose on Autism Speaks way back in 2020, Autism Speaks being a horrifically ableist and pro-eugenics organisation that presents itself as the solution to autism. I put out a request for compassionate alternatives to said organisation, and Bethany's name was one that came highly suggested. That got me interested, and I decided to check out her work, only to discover that she was openly promoting the idea that Christianity should be used to fix LGBT+ people. That is to say, torture the queer out of them, going so far as to compare us to animal rapists whilst referring to us as unclean.
Homosexual acts are wrong because the Bible has said so, and also it doesn't lead to anything other than a feeling. You don't end up with a child eventually. You just have a feeling in your body. Now, I do believe it is possible for God to make a way and for you to be in a heterosexual relationship. And if it's the case that maybe you want to start a family or something like that, I believe that God can do that for you. Does that mean someone who has done that before cannot be clean and not come before God and repent and ask that he helps them to remain celibate? No, they can do that. They can always do that. Even someone who has been delivered from alcoholism. Some days they're going to sit there and they're going to think, I really want a beer right now. Does that make them sinful? No. It just makes them a human being. Look, we shouldn't put people down. We shouldn't say, oh, it's okay to have these relations with people because it's love. I don't think we always understand the difference between love and lust, but I am saying that the idea of prompting people to do whatever makes them feel good and just do what they feel leads you to people who do intimate things with animals and inanimate objects and things like that. Things that are very clearly not natural and not normal and just really jacked up because you told them, if you feel it, you should do it. So what I just want to say is that I think that churches should open up the doors to people who are either in homosexual relationships or think they're homosexual because of attractions, and let them know, hey, homosexual acts aren't right, and you shouldn't be doing that with someone of the same sex.
Sorry for the long clip show. Many people simply do not believe me when I tell them what she said, hence I need to play it in every video I make relating to her. Do note that each clip was timestamped, just in case you'd like to double check to make sure nothing has been taken out of context. Returning to what was said, I naturally felt compelled to respond in a video, bringing special attention to the fact that the people most at risk from Bethany's calls to violence were LGBT+ youth, meaning they were the people most at risk of said torture. Now, if that sounds a little hyperbolic to you, I'd like to highlight the fact that Bethany agrees with me, at least when those very same methods are targeted at autistic people because they're autistic. Here is what Bethany had to say regarding Ivar Lovaas, the founder of ABA.
Ivar Lovaas, who was considered the father of ABA. Although Skinner's and behaviorism's ideas in general can seem dehumanizing, it is actually Lovaas that contributes to most of the disdain around ABA's beginnings. On the Lovaas Center's website, Dr. Lovaas is quoted as saying, "I would like to be remembered in the tradition of other empiricists and educators who put a good deal of faith in the power of the environment to shape human behavior. I'd like to be remembered as one who worked to free those whose minds enslaved them, and as a person who challenged the notion that variables that we used to consider to be stable and unchanging, like IQ and autism, aren't really as unchanging as many had thought them to be." Lovaas worked alongside Don Baer, Montrose Wolfe, Sid Bijou, Todd Risley, and James Sherman in establishing behavior modification at the University of Washington.
Bethany then goes on to explain how a 1987 study by Lovaas titled Behavioral Treatment and Normal Education and Intellectual Functioning in Young Autistic Children acted as the cornerstone for ABA as we know it today. ABA relies on psychologically conditioning autistic children, punishing them for displaying neurodivergent behaviors whilst rewarding them for displaying neurotypical ones in an attempt to force them to adhere to the confines of neurotypical society. The methods of punishment range from verbal abuse all the way up to shock aversion therapy, as noted by Bethany here.
Forget that the person is a human being with a mind, with emotions, and a psyche that might be affected by torture. As long as it works, it's fine. And it's ethical, because the ends justify the means. And even if it's not using electric shocks in your area, ABA is getting worse, not better, in its attempts to control, manipulate, and change autistic people.
So Bethany very clearly, and rightfully, views ABA to be tantamount to torture. Thing is, his 1987 paper wasn't the first time Lovaas forwarded said torture as a noble means to force children to conform. In fact, Lovaas published a very similar paper in 1974, this time titled Behavioral Treatment of Deviant Sex Role Behaviors in a Male Child. The 1974 paper centers on one child, a 4-year-old boy who was brought to Lovaas due to displaying signs of feminine behavior, what were taken to be signs that the child was becoming gay or trans. Lovaas and his colleague, George Rikers, abused the child into hiding any such behavior before presenting him as a success. The reality, however, is that Lovaas and Riker had inflicted acute psychological trauma that continued to fester as the child grew up. At least it did, until he took his own life. His suicide was directly linked to Lovaas's treatment. Point is, ABA and reparative torture are not similar by coincidence. One is copied directly from the other, with both using psychological conditioning to try and torture what are perceived as bad behaviors out of people, primarily children. That is why it's hypocritical for Bethany to assert that ABA is torture, only to act like she didn't promote the very same thing in her video, demonizing the LGBT+ community, calling for us to be cured. Both ABA and so-called reparative therapy are forms of torture that disproportionately target children. To give actual numbers on just how harmful attempts to change a person's gender or sexuality are, around 8% of LGBT+ youth in the US who have not had people attempt to convince them to change their gender or sexuality have attempted suicide within the last year, which is actually 1% lower than the national average. However, that 8% almost triples to 23% in those who have had people try to convince them to change their gender or sexuality. To be clear, this is solely attempts to convince a person to change their gender or sexuality. This includes things like Bethany's video, in which she argues that being LGBT+ is a bad and sinful thing, which is particularly disturbing when we acknowledge the fact that she is very popular among autistic youth. Yet it gets even worse when we look at the impact of organized repetitive torture, like that found in many churches across the US, the very thing Bethany seemed to be calling for in her video, when she urges churches to lure in LGBT+ people with the intent of fixing us. Such methods further increases attempted suicide from the baseline of 8% to a whopping 42% among general LGBT+ youth, a number that's even higher among trans youth specifically at 57%. That's a 5 to 7-fold increase. That's why this issue was so important to tackle back in 2020. Though, returning to when I uncovered the truth about Bethany, before I was able to finish my video on her, my video on Autism Speaks began to do very well, leading me to be approached by NeuroClastic, a self-described self-advocacy group for autists that I had promoted in said video as one of the compassionate alternatives to Autism Speaks. They were impressed by my work and invited me to become a part of their team, setting up an account for me and everything, a prospect I was excited about. I had been made a victim of some particularly grotesque transmisia in 2019, specifically transmisogyny. A cis woman by the name of Rachel Oates targeted myself and several other trans people for months. Among other things, Oates published identifying information taken from a trans-focused mental health support group. She published private emails from a trans audience member who was afraid to approach her publicly, and she mocked me for using social media safety features to block her, only to flip the script the moment I clapped back and swore at her for ordering her 100,000 subscribers to circumvent that block to explicitly provoke a response. She framed herself as the victim, going as far as to weaponize self-harm and suicide, claiming I spent months harassing her, in spite of all evidence showing that I was the one raising barriers she tore down, again, going so far as to mention said block in her post, explicitly telling people to help her violate said safety feature. None of that mattered. She was a crying cis woman, I was just an evil tranny. Suffice to say, Oates did an incredible amount of damage to my reputation. So being approached by an organization like NeuroClastic was a dream come true. Working for such a seemingly up-and-coming group would have acted as a way for me to begin repairing my reputation, changing the narrative surrounding me. So you can perhaps imagine my horror when, as I responded to a thread in which Bethany defended her queer music standpoint by decrying people's criticism of her, a response in which I noted I was about to expose the true extent of her bigoted behavior, the official NeuroClastic account came out of nowhere and tried to force me to self-censor. Again, this was before my video had come out, meaning they hadn't even seen the evidence I had, such as the reel shown earlier. All skepticism and care was thrown out the window to defend their golden goose. Because of course, it turned out that Bethany was a contributor at NeuroClastic, a fact I'd been previously unaware of, and that NeuroClastic were using her name to boost their presence in the autistic community. So how dare I, a queer autist, a fucking nobody, criticize their top influencer? I held my ground. knowing full well that doing so would likely cost me my biggest break since the events of 2019. I wasn't about to ignore someone calling for the torture of my community, especially not when those most at risk are LGBT+ youth. This seemed to take NeuroClastic by surprise, and they soon changed their tune, trying to sweeten me up by officially stating that they agreed with everything in my response, which included the discussion surrounding Bethany's support for the torture of LGBT+ youth, a fact so central to the video that it was highlighted in the thumbnail. So not exactly something you could miss, unless they were lying about having checked the video out, which is not my responsibility. I say that since, far from taking measures to ensure that such a violation of basic decency never happened again, they refused to take any action, either against Bethany as a contributor or Terra Vance, NeuroClastic's founder, who it turned out had been the one responsible for the attempts to get me to self-censor. So I published a video, documenting how NeuroClastic went out of its way to defend homophobe whilst refusing to hold those responsible to account. In response to us going public about what had been said, Vance threatened me with a strategic lawsuit against public participation, a slap suit, a form of legal abuse intended to silence criticism. We weren't impressed by what they wrote, leading us to ignore them, wrapping up the events of 2020. Then, in December of 2021, I received news that Bethany had returned to the matter and had taken to doubling down on her anti-LGBT+ bigotry. This led me to publish a follow-up to our previous expose, detailing the many ways she lied to our audience about what had happened. This also got me to dig a little deeper, leading me to discover an incredible amount of anti-black racism on her channel. I found out that Bethany had exploited black murders to center her own feelings, acting out a police shooting as if she were the intended victim. She also framed racism as a spiritual issue that black people can only be saved from by converting to Christianity, whilst also equivalating the usage of the word bastard by Black Lives Matter protesters to the literal murder of black people, including black children. I won't be playing the clips now as I need to play them in the last chapter of the video, though I'll put up a timestamp in case you'd like to jump ahead and see that before returning to this section. Just know that they're on the same level as the clips I played earlier, just super racist instead of anti-LGBT+. It was during said response that I let slip the fact that NeuroClastic had threatened me with legal action to try and hide their support for Bethany's bigotry. I brought it up since Bethany was trying to paint herself as the poor victim of some sort of progressive anti-Christian conspiracy, ignoring just how much privilege she had to have an entire organization continue to fight in her corner even after she'd been exposed as supporting the torture of LGBT+ youth. Because yeah, NeuroClastic had kept her on board, publishing new articles after stating on record that they agreed with everything in our initial expose, including my conclusion that Bethany had promoted the torture of LGBT+ youth. Of course, it wasn't long before NeuroClastic came out lying, claiming that they had never threatened me. This led me to create another expose in March of 2022, detailing the evidence that they had, whilst also telling people to watch out for the queermisia and racism at NeuroClastic due to who they'd promoted and how they treated me. And that finally brings us up to speed, allowing us to move on to how Terra Vance exploited their friend's suicide to try and shield NeuroClastic from mounting evidence of queermisia and racism. For you see, whilst I thought that NeuroClastic had finally learnt its lesson about us and the fact that we will not be bullied into silence, it turned out that I was very wrong. On the 27th of June 2022, 3 months after our final expose on NeuroClastic, I was tagged in a 24-tweet thread written and published by NeuroClastic founder Terra Vance. Something I need to be clear on before we begin is that due to the jumbled nature of said thread, as well as its length, I will be reorganizing things to make responding easier. Therefore, I've gone ahead and included a full, unedited copy of the thread in the script, just so that you can check things for yourself. The thread starts with, quote, "Today would have been my best friend's birthday. He was an ex-evangelical. My friend B, also an ex-evangelical, just unalived. She had reached out to me shortly before, but I was in crisis. I too am an ex-evangelical." There's a lot of things only people who live that kind of hell can understand. It takes years, a lifetime to move past it. The PTSD of much of that patriarchal, terrifying culture is so hard to move past. If you get out, you're likely with no family and no support. Like my best friend and like B. You find yourself in unhealthy relationships because that's all you've ever known. How to be used and take abuse. You don't even know how to recognize abuse because you think it's all normal. Especially if you were socialized as a girl / assigned female at birth. When B reached out to me, she needed help, but I had just had surgery, awake, because my health was too poor for sedation and it doesn't work anyway because I team with adrenaline. I was in a severe autoimmune flare and broke my jaw from stress grinding. I was stress grinding that hard because Essence of Thought had just made a third hit piece on me and an org I founded. They accused me / the org of all manner of things that are the diametrical opposite of who I am / the org is. End quote. So, in the space of a couple of tweets, we go from what began as a seemingly heartfelt post about the loss of two friends, to Vance exploiting said deaths to imply that my criticism of NeuroClastic's willingness to support queermisia and racism was directly responsible for one of them. That strikes me as incredibly opportunistic and frankly disgusting. Vance is effectively grave robbing a friend as a quick and easy means of stifling criticism of their actions, because that seems to be their intent. I was the only account tagged in said thread, twice I must add, once via the official Essence of Thought account, which was later terminated when Musk took over the site, and once via my personal account. Nobody else was linked or mentioned, just me. Of course, all of this completely ignores the fact that had Terra, Vance and the NeuroClastic board not gone to bat for Bethany's queermisia and racism, I wouldn't have needed to produce anything. I could have instead continued to work with NeuroClastic, secure in the knowledge that they weren't a sycophantic organization dedicated more to bolstering their presence by sucking up to people like Bethany. NeuroClastic, and more importantly Vance, chose not to do that. Vance decided that defending bigots and threatening queer autistic creators was more important to their brand than being there for a friend. I'm sorry to hear about the death of their friend, but that doesn't mean I have to be okay with what Vance is doing here. Now, to anyone familiar with my channel or who paid attention during the history section, this move on Vance's part might seem awfully similar to the actions of Rachel Oates, an observation that actually has merit. You see, following our 2022 expose, NeuroClastic was approached on Twitter by an Oates fan who told them that, quote, "That person bullied Rachel Oates to the point of a breakdown. Rachel talks about this in her latest video on YouTube. I hope you're okay." End quote. What the user did here was hand Vance an instruction manual on how to effectively silence us, with Rachel Oates' Darvo being the most successful in that regard. That's why so much of what Vance says in their thread falls back on the same patterns of transmisogyny. Take, as example, the aggressive nature of how they refer to things, labeling an evidence-based expose as a quote-unquote hit piece. They also omit key information, as can be seen in quote, "Even though I was polite and agreed with them that they were right, and even though I immediately apologized and offered to take my tweets down when they told me the person had a big following, they still had to warn their 30,000 followers that we, the org, go to bat for homophobia." End quote. Glossing over the facts that I try to talk reason to NeuroClastic, raising the issue with the board, only to be fucked around by them, which subsequently forced me to publish my expose on NeuroClastic. This is erased from Vance's timeline entirely so that they can present NeuroClastic, which by this point is just an extension of themselves, as being passive, a notion they've already primed their audience to accept in stating that dealing with abuse as an ex-evangelical is difficult, quote, especially if you were socialized as a girl / assigned female at birth, end quote. Everything Vance is falling back on as an AFAB MB is designed to present themselves as passive to better contrast me, what Vance frames as the inherently aggressive AMAB MB, just going on a rampage without a cause. That is why Vance is stealing the gender-critical fascist idea of socialized gender, one of the ideas that bigots have used to deny trans women access to women's spaces, arguing that regardless of who they are, they still have male socialization and are therefore dangerous. Transmisogyny allowed people to rewrite what happened in 2019, an effect Terra Vance seeks to replicate. And this isn't the only time they attempt to do so, with them later asserting that, quote, "But I told Ethel Thurston that I was a trauma counselor and admin a group for ex-evangelicals. I told her that my best friend unalived themselves. I tried to hint that the person they were about to make a video about was on the verge, and I had just heard about that." End quote. The implication here being that a marginalized person should silence themselves for the comfort of bigots. So allow me to be absolutely clear about my stance on this. That is not my responsibility. The fact that bigots often threaten self-harm and even suicide when faced with the prospect of losing the power they seized via their bigotry merely shows us just how unwilling they are to give up said power, that they see terrorizing marginalized people to be a pursuit worthy of self-destruction. I am not sorry to say that it is not on the backs of queer people to shoulder the burden of anti-queer hate for the sake of bigots, any more than it is on the backs of black people to shoulder the burden of anti-black racism, or on disabled and neurodivergent people to shoulder the burden of ableism. If being criticized for your bigotry leads you to feel these things, then you need to go see a therapist and work on yourself, since you are the problem. It is fucking disgraceful to see the founder of an organization supposedly dedicated to autism self-advocacy demand that a marginalized group self-sacrifice itself for the feelings of bigots. Queer people are not expendable, and it is not compassionate of Vance to treat us as such. Of course, it wouldn't be a Terra Vance interaction without our scheduled lawsuit denial. For as much evidence as we have, Vance continues to assert that, quote, Essence of Thought accused me / the org of all manner of things that are the diametrical opposite of who I am / the org is. One thing is threatening them with a slap suit. What I said was that I was going to attempt to have the videos removed, but that's expensive and stressful. This is what I meant. I never even heard of a slap suit. End quote. and quote, I asked her to take the video down because it was not fair or accurate. Ethel said I needed to explain why, so I sent a list of about 30 inaccuracies or misleading things. No reply. A full year later, Ethel is telling people that I'm threatening her livelihood with a slap suit. I didn't even know what that was. End quote. Only problem is, we still have Vance's original statement threatening us in stating that, quote, I have a responsibility to protect the organization against undue slander, libel, and false light. I'm not going to interact after this unless you have a specific suggestion or request about repairing my mistake from that night. I would like nothing more than to find a way to move on. But I'm also not prepared to let this just sit on the internet when I'm trying to get legislation changed. If I have to, I will pursue other means to have it removed, not because I think we're above reproach or deserve to not be called out on mistakes, but because it is not accurate or fair to what actually happened. That is a very easy case to make, but it's expensive, a lot of work, and stress that is needless. End quote. This is such a clear threat of legal action that it is downright insulting to everyone's intelligence that Vance tried to pass it off as anything else. I mean, who the fuck says undue slander, libel, and false light in day-to-day speech? The word most people use, at least when they're not trying to sound threatening by attempting legalese, is lying. This is a fact further supported in how they openly talked about consulting a lawyer, stating, quote, I did consult with a lawyer who said it was fully in the realm of slander, false light, and defamation. Because it is. It's not fair criticism. It has many falsehoods and mischaracterizations in it. It's painting us as the opposite of who we are. End quote. So Vance would have you believe that they spent money talking to a lawyer, yet were not considering taking legal action? Speaking of money, or the supposed lack thereof, the excuses continue, with Vance asserting, quote, I'm poor. Our org is poor. I don't even think about lawsuits. My culture does not tend to use or access courts or the legal system for any reason. This is almost as big an insult and character assassination as being called homophobic as a queer activist. I was working with trans people in DC on queer rights probably before Ethel was born. Even though I said I did not even know what a slapsuit was multiple times, a third video came out, this time with Ethel, a white woman, continuing to accuse us of threatening her and lying. End quote. And quote, I googled how to remove a defamation video from YouTube, and the first response was a reputation management company. It cost $2,000 per link to get a video removed. That was more than half our budget at the time for just one video. End quote. That's the great thing about threats, at least as far as people like Vance are concerned. They're effectively free. A slapsuit isn't supposed to make it to court, since in most cases, they'd be thrown out. They're simply meant to intimidate the smaller party, in this case myself and the other two admins at Essence of Thought, into capitulating and removing the offending piece. None of these financial excuses matter when placed in context, nor do Vance's claims to not know what a slapsuit is, a fact I do not believe if they're telling the truth about talking to a lawyer. It's possible that they're lying about that, but either way, they're lying about something, and that is entirely their responsibility. Moving on, we come to a point in which Vance almost gets it, stating, quote, these videos made us out to seem like a corporate bully. Then, a month later, the Judge Rottenberg Center threatened us with a slapsuit. The wealthy, incredibly connected torture dungeon where several people have died and others have been brutalized threatened to sue us. End quote. My videos, which are all fully referenced and supply ample evidence, make you seem like a corporate bully because you are a corporate bully. You throw around the weight of your organization to silence criticism of your contributors, like Bethany, who, at the time this thread was made, was still working for NeuroClastic. I actually captured this screenshot of Bethany posting NeuroClastic content within minutes of seeing Vance's post, due to me wondering if the two had coordinated on this. This is years after I shown Bethany's support for the torture of queer youth, something NeuroClastic accepted was her position, and half a year after I'd shown her anti-black racism. Which is a fact we need to keep in mind as we move on to the ways in which Terra Vance exploits BIPOC discourse, something that can be seen in the following. Quote, Ethel, a white woman, also warned black people our BIPOC-led org were not a safe place to be paid to publish on. Then, Ethel sends DMs to black contributors showing screenshots of me saying I was going to attempt to have the videos removed as evidence of me trying to sue. End quote. Actually, it was to show you threatening to sue. But with that noted, let's start by discussing that last bit, which refers to an incident in 2022 in which a black writer at NeuroClastic publicly asserted that Vance hadn't threatened me with legal violence, leading me to message them with a screenshot of the threat itself. Let me be clear. I fucked up. I shouldn't send private messages to people I don't know, even if I'm trying to get them to look at the evidence regarding statements they're making publicly. If the statements are made in public, I should seek to resolve them as such. By messaging them privately, I overstepped general internet etiquette and I regret doing so. The whole point of the channel is that the evidence is here for when people want it. I don't want to make a habit of knocking on doors, and I shouldn't have reached out the way I did. So for that, I am genuinely sorry and have strived to do better. In this instance, we ended up mutually blocking and moving on, which was the end of it as far as I'm aware. Moving on to the general argument, I did not know NeuroClastic was BIPOC-led at the time of that video. That said, it's also completely irrelevant. Bethany's racism wasn't targeted at all non-white folk. It was specifically anti-black racism. Bethany exploited the murders of black people to center her own feelings, framed racism as a spiritual issue that black people can only be saved from by converting to Christianity, and equivalated the usage of the word bastard by Black Lives Matter protesters to the literal murder of black people, including black children. Here are a few examples of what I mean, taken from two, not one, but two separate videos.
We talk about this in our church as this is a sign of surrender to God. This is also the sign we give, right, to police to say don't shoot. Our hands should be lifted to praise God and say I give you everything. It shouldn't be on the other side of a weapon, of individuals who are paid to protect innocent people. This shouldn't have to be the position of an innocent person. You can't tell me that what happened to George Floyd isn't demonic. I know our God is a healer, that I know he is a redeemer, that I know that he is good. I know that he is the only one who can ever truly make us free, because no government can tell us what our rights are. Our rights are given by God. Unity under the Holy Spirit to let God do what only God can do. Church, judge rightly, repent, and stand up against the devil and the wickedness and evil that is racism. We must come to God with the things that have hurt us and let him heal things that only he can heal, because time sure hasn't done it. For me, I don't see it as reasonable to completely abolish the police system. I also do not believe that all cops are bad, or other words that saying or that acronym may mean. There are situations of violence and wrongdoing on both the parts of citizens and police. I talked to you not too long ago about the issue of Black Lives Matter. Let me make it clear that I don't agree with the movement as a whole. I don't agree with the concept of hating police, hating all these people, tearing things down, being destructive, and a lot of the things that also kind of get melded into the movement itself.
Again, I feel they need to share this evidence since people seem so resistant to the idea that a white cis woman could ever be a terrible person on account of her being a white cis woman. This is in spite of the fact that the term Karen was invented by black communities for a reason. So, by blending all non-white, non-European ethnicities into one group, BIPOC, Vance can effectively homogenize the anti-black struggle into something they can claim authority over me on, when neither of us has that authority. That's why, in my original video, I even went as far as to state. Now, just to make myself absolutely clear, I take no issue with any black person who applies for the work or has already done so. It is incredibly difficult for black people to have their voices heard, let alone be paid for their time. My issue is not with them, period. Black people know what works best for them. What I want to know, however, is how NeuroClastic intends to respond to the fact that one of their writers has been outed as having extremely anti-black beliefs, such as taking a bigger issue with cops being called bastards than the murder of black people. I mean, NeuroClastic has already had months to act, yet haven't. That's also why I was forthcoming with my evidence. I didn't expect people to simply take my word that Bethany was racist. I showed them what statements I found problematic before explaining why. Yes, I might be a white woman or a white internet stranger, as Vance puts it, though to be clear, I'm actually non-binary femme fluid, but I'm entirely open with what I think and why. Which is a hell of a lot more than can be said about Vance or NeuroClastic. Because, again, NeuroClastic did nothing at all in the months following me shining a light upon Bethany's anti-black racism. They continued to work alongside her after my video exposing the fact had gone out, a video Vance clearly watched, meaning they were aware. And we know they'd watched that video because they make claims about its content, as seen in the following. Quote, "No mention of the 30 inaccuracies, no mention of why it was critical to remove the video because we were trying to save an autistic person's life, but the body cam footage kept autoplaying the totally unfair video accusing us of all manner of things." End quote. Getting the less important part out of the way, the supposed 30 inaccuracies that I didn't touch upon, not only were they touched upon, but the entire document was made publicly available by me in our second expose on NeuroClastic. And whilst it's true that I didn't touch on all 30 points, I did take an example to show just how dishonest they were, showing why the remaining 29 weren't worth my time. Here is the clip of me doing just that. Another way you can tell is through NeuroClastic's attempts to revise events as they happened. Take for example this line found at the start of point 3 in which they state, quote, "Responding to a tweet with a single word to someone about whom I knew nothing at the time is not associating with someone." End quote. Again, the actual issue at this point was them coming after me to try and get me to self-censor, but what's important here is the claim that Bethany was just someone about whom I knew nothing at the time. Take that line and compare it to this message sent to me by Terra via the official NeuroClastic Twitter account on the 2nd of May, 2019, which states, quote, "I thought she was like 21/22. I do know details about her as I have a friend who has been working trying to help her." End quote. So they did know about Bethany's homophobia to the point that they were trying to help her. So when Vance asserts that I made no mention of the 30 inaccuracies, that is an outright lie. You can quite literally hear me refer to point 3 in said document. So the issue is not that I didn't refer to them, but that I didn't bend my reality to match Vance's blatantly dishonest assertions. Again, I gave people access to the entire document detailing these 30 assertions, as well as NeuroClastic's supposed reason for wanting the video removed. I was entirely transparent with my audience, because that is what we pride ourselves on here at Essence of Thought: transparency. As for the reason NeuroClastic gave me for why they wanted the video taken down, I didn't bring it up because I didn't want to allow them to exploit anti-black violence in the same way they exploited anti-queer violence. It is a fact that NeuroClastic has on its team anti-black racists who vehemently oppose black people fighting for the right to live. So to even respond to such an assertion at the time, I felt would have been lending NeuroClastic power they had no right to demand. Was that the right choice? I don't know. I think only the black community can really weigh in on that. But since it came up again and I am now being accused of leaving it out for nefarious reasons, I have laid out my thoughts behind my decision. May I be judged accordingly, with those doing so not having to fear abuse from me in the same way I have NeuroClastic. As for the point itself, I once again reiterate that this never would have been a problem had Terra, Vance, and NeuroClastic actually acted on Bethany's queer misere and anti-black racism. I gave NeuroClastic every opportunity to fix things, not strictly out of the goodness of my own heart, but because I saw them as a possible way for me to begin moving beyond the events of 2019. But when they decided that both queer and black communities were expendable, that was a path I could no longer take. Another solution to this would have been NeuroClastic doing the work they claim to have done without branding it so heavily to them. My video was only tagged in relation to their organization's name, meaning that had it been such a big problem and had they actually had good intentions, they could have just not branded everything so heavily after them and their organization. Like, they of course can't control me and my perception of their actions, specifically how disingenuous they are, but they can certainly control their own going forward. Of course, they would never do that since, in my opinion, NeuroClastic doesn't believe in doing good for goodness sake. They seem to only do what they think will get them attention to grow their brand. That's why they kept Stephanie Bethany, that's why they put their own PR before black victims of violence, and that's why they refuse to try and make actual amends for the violence they upheld. Which brings us to the topic of this video, with them exploiting the deaths of their friends to try and fashion a weapon to rip open old wounds. NeuroClastic is not a safe organization, especially with Terra, Vance at the helm. That much is certain. Yet this is but the tip of the iceberg. There is so much I am having to hold back on because of ongoing efforts by others, especially former BIPOC contributors, to hold them accountable. Stuff I am not at liberty to share. Yet. But I can at least have my say on the matter to let them know, whoever they are, that they're not alone in this. Because I am not the only one to suffer Vance's ire, a fact that should be raising eyebrows. This is not how a charity should be operating in any way. Though what do you think? What are your thoughts about Terra Vance's post? How do you think NeuroClastic could begin to make amends for their past atrocities? Is that even possible at this point? And if not, why? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. The last thing I want to do is apologize for how late this video came out following the inciting incident. I tried creating it towards the end of 2022, getting as far as to even record and edit the audio at the start of 2023, yet couldn't finish it. I kept worrying that the section regarding oats needed to be expanded upon in order to explain key facts, leading me to add multiple patches until it became cumbersome. That's when I set myself to complete the mainline series last year, allowing me to reference said series in this video. Though, if you appreciate what we do here and want to help out, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Garrett Van Vorst, Goddess Alita, Marble Wings, Sosh Daniels, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.